The orbital station, Haven's Rest, drifted through the void like a metallic flower, its petals of steel and glass catching the light of 3 distant suns. For 37 years it had served as humanity's first foothold in the Zurian Nebula, a testament to the species that had crawled from the gravity wells of Earth and refused to stay buried. Captain David Harrison stood at the observation deck's reinforced viewport, watching cargo shuttles drift between the station's docking arms like lazy fireflies. His weathered hands pressed against the cold transper steel, and the reflection staring back at him bore the scars of a man who had seen too much. The crow's feet around his gray eyes told stories of solar radiation and sleepless nights. The slight tremor in his left hand whispered of battles fought in the deep black between worlds. Humanity had not been invited to the stars. The Galactic Concord, that sprawling confederation of 12 alien species, had discovered Earth's radio signals in 257, but their first contact had been a warning, not a welcome. Stay within your solar system. Your kind is too dangerous for the civilized galaxy. The message had been delivered in perfect English by beings who called themselves the HFY, their voices like wind chimes in a hurricane. But humans had never been good at following orders. The first human colony ship had launched in secret in 2161, the second in 2163. By 2170, humanity had seeded 7 systems beyond Sol, each settlement a defiant middle finger extended toward the cosmic bureaucrats who had tried to cage them. The Concord's response had been swift and absolute: total economic isolation. No trade, no technology exchange, no diplomatic recognition. Humanity would survive alone or not at all. David's reflection shifted as a shadow passed across the viewport. A HFY transport had arrived, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with patterns that hurt human eyes to follow directly. The ship was graceful in the way that jellyfish were graceful, organic curves and flowing lines that made human engineering look crude by comparison. It docked with barely a whisper, sealing arms extending like tentacles to embrace the station's rigid geometry. "Captain?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Ashley Brooks, David's second-in-command and the closest thing to family he had left in the black. She was young, 34 to his 51, but she had earned her position through skill, not nepotism. Her dark skin bore the ritual scars of the Martian colonial militia, and her eyes held the same haunted quality that marked all veterans of the Titan Rebellion. "What have we got, Ash?" "Refugee transport from the Helix sector. 237 souls, mostly HFY civilians. Their convoy was hit by raiders 3 days out from Zerion Prime." She paused, consulting her tablet. "They're requesting emergency medical assistance in temporary shelter." David's jaw tightened. The raiders had been growing bolder lately. Pirates and extremists who targeted refugee convoys fleeing the war zones in the Outer Rim. Most were human vessels, crewed by the desperate and the damned, striking at soft targets because they couldn't face the Concord's military head-on. Medical status: 17 critical injuries, 43 requiring immediate treatment. Dr. Yates is prepping the medical bay now. "And our supplies?" Brooks hesitated. "We can handle it, but it'll stretch us thin. The next supply run from New Geneva isn't due for 3 weeks." David nodded grimly. Haven's Rest operated on a shoestring budget, like most human installations in contested space. The colonial administration preferred to fund military assets over humanitarian ones, despite the diplomatic value of showing mercy to their former enemies. "Clear them for docking in Bay 7. Full medical support, emergency rations for all passengers." He turned from the viewport, his decision made. "And Brooks, double the security detail. I want to know who's coming aboard before they clear quarantine." "Yes, sir." As Brooks departed, David remained at the viewport, watching the HFY transport complete its docking sequence. Somewhere aboard that vessel were beings who had fled their homes, carrying nothing but hope and whatever precious possessions they could salvage. He knew that feeling. Humanity had been refugees once, cast out from their own world by those who feared what they might become. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were now the ones offering shelter. Zixandra Kitathalar pressed her face against the transport's small porthole, watching the human station grow larger as they approached. At 19 standard cycles, she possessed the fluid grace common to her people, elongated limbs that moved like flowing water, skin that shifted through subtle hues of blue and silver, and large eyes that could perceive spectrums of light invisible to most other species. But today, those eyes were red with grief. Her fingers unconsciously moved to the amulet hanging from her neck, a piece of crystallized starlight that had belonged to her mother and her mother's mother before that. The relic was ancient, its origins lost to the mists of HFY prehistory. But it hummed with a subtle energy that spoke to something deep in her genetic memory. It was all she had left. Zixandra. The voice belonged to her uncle, Veltar, who had served as a diplomatic attaché before the war reached their homeworld. His usually pristine robes were stained with blood and debris, and one of his secondary arms hung useless at his side. "We will be docking soon. Prepare yourself." "Uncle, are the humans truly as savage as the stories claim?" Her voice carried the harmonic undertones of her species, a musical quality that made even whispered words sound like poetry. Veltar's skin flickered through worried hues of purple and gray. "The humans are complicated, child. They are warriors born of a death world, yes, but they are also capable of great compassion. Remember that it was human ships that responded to our distress call, not Concord vessels." Zixandra nodded, though uncertainty clouded her features. Growing up on Zurian Prime, she had heard countless tales of human brutality, their wars, their colonization of hostile worlds, their refusal to submit to Concord authority. But she had also heard other stories, whispered in the shadows by those who had encountered humans in the deep frontier, tales of impossible courage, of humans throwing themselves into hopeless battles to protect strangers. The transport shuddered as it completed docking. Through the porthole she could see figures in human military uniforms moving with practiced efficiency along the boarding tube. They were smaller than she had expected, most barely reached her shoulder height, but they moved with a predatory confidence that made her skin prickle with instinctive weariness. "Remember," Veltar murmured as the airlock cycled open, "we are guests here. Show respect but do not show weakness. Humans respond to strength." The first human to board was a female with dark skin and numerous scars marking her face and arms. She wore the rank insignia of a senior officer, and her eyes swept across the refugee compartment with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to violence. When she spoke, her voice was surprisingly gentle. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Brooks, representing the Colonial Administration. You're safe now. We'll be providing medical care and temporary shelter while we arrange transport to a permanent settlement." A murmur of relief swept through the refugees, their skin colors shifting to calmer hues. But Zixandra noticed that the humans' eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats and escape routes with the efficiency of a predator. She wondered if this was what it meant to be from a death world, to see danger in every shadow, to prepare for violence even in moments of peace. As the medical teams boarded and began triage, Zixandra found herself studying the humans with fascination. They were so small, so fragile-looking, yet they moved with absolute confidence in their ability to impose their will on the universe. Their bodies bore the scars of countless battles, but they wore those marks like badges of honor rather than sources of shame. One human in particular caught her attention, a young male with sandy hair and intense green eyes who seemed to be coordinating the medical response. He moved between injured HFY with gentle efficiency, his hands steady despite the carnage he was treating. When he reached an elderly female whose injuries were clearly beyond help, he knelt beside her and spoke in broken but heartfelt HFY. "Peace flow to your final journey. Grandmother honored. Star ancestors wait. Welcome for your spirit return." The dying female's skin shifted to peaceful shades of gold and white, and she passed with a smile on her lips. The human remained kneeling for several moments, his head bowed in what she recognized as a gesture of respect for the dead. Zixandra felt something stir in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. This human, this supposed savage from a death world, had shown more compassion in a single moment than many Concord officials had displayed during the entire evacuation from Zurian Prime. "Your name designation, human medic?" she asked, approaching him as he began to rise. He looked up at her and she was startled by the depth of emotion in his eyes. "Jackson Wright. But most folks just call me Jack. You speak standard pretty well. I studied your language at university. Before," she gestured vaguely toward the damaged transport, before the war reached our homeworld. Jack nodded gravely. I'm sorry for your loss. All of your losses. War's a terrible thing, no matter who's fighting it. You speak as one who knows war intimately. More than I'd like to admit. He shouldered his medical kit and began moving toward the next patient. But that's not important right now. What matters is getting your people patched up and somewhere safe. As Zix Indra watched him work, she began to understand why the Concord feared humanity. It wasn't their weapons or their warships that made them dangerous. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible. They looked at the infinite void of space and saw not an obstacle but an invitation. They faced overwhelming odds and responded not with surrender but with defiance. They were not just survivors. They were conquerors, who conquered through the simple act of refusing to die. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. The refugee processing took 14 hours. David hadn't slept in 36, but coffee and stubborn determination kept him moving through the reports, medical assessments and security screenings. By the time the last HFY had been assigned temporary quarters, the station's chronometer showed 0347 ship's time. He was reviewing supply manifests in his office when Brooks appeared in his doorway looking as exhausted as he felt. All refugees are settled, Captain. No security issues flagged during screening. Dr. Wright's team has stabilized all the critical cases, though we lost 3 more during surgery. David rubbed his eyes. "'Cause plasma burns from close-range energy weapons. Professional work by all accounts. These weren't random pirates. Someone wanted those ships dead. Any idea why?" Brooks hesitated. "There's something you should see. Vault 7, whenever you have a moment." David's blood chilled. Vault 7 was reserved for items too dangerous or valuable to store with regular cargo. What kind of something? The kind that makes people want to kill refugees for it. 20 minutes later, David stood before a containment field that hummed with barely contained energy. Inside the field, suspended in a web of force beams, hung a crystalline amulet that seemed to bend light around itself. The artifact was beautiful in the way that supernovas were beautiful, magnificent and terrible and utterly alien. One of the refugees was carrying it, Brooks explained. Young female named Zixandra Cathalar. Sensors picked it up during the standard scans. The thing's putting out energy readings that shouldn't be possible with known physics. David stared at the amulet, feeling a strange tingling sensation at the base of his skull. Does she know what it is? Family heirloom, according to her statement. Belonged to her mother who died in the initial attack on Zurian Prime. Girl seems to think it's just sentimental value. And you don't think so? Captain, this thing is broadcasting on frequencies we can't even measure properly. If word gets out that it's here, Brooks shook her head. We could have every treasure hunter, arms dealer, and government black ops team in 3 sectors coming for it. David continued to stare at the amulet. In the swirling patterns of its crystalline structure, he thought he could see stars being born and dying, galaxies spinning through the void, the birth and death of entire civilizations compressed into moments of light and shadow. "Sir?" Brooks's voice seemed to come from very far away. David blinked, tearing his gaze away from the artifact. For a moment he felt dizzy, as if he had been falling through space and suddenly stopped. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "I was asking what you want to do about it." Standard protocol would be to confiscate the artifact and turn it over to colonial intelligence for analysis. Standard protocol, David repeated slowly. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Standard protocol had condemned humanity to isolation. Standard protocol had turned refugees into security threats and artifacts into weapons. Belay that order. Brooks blinked. "Sir? Return the amulet to the girl. It belongs to her family, and she's been through enough without us stealing her mother's memory. Captain, with respect, the security implications will be our problem to handle." David turned away from the containment field, his decision made. Humanity didn't claw its way to the stars by taking treasures from refugees, Commander. We're better than that. As they left the vault, neither of them noticed the way the amulet's light pulsed in response to David's words, as if the ancient artifact approved of his choice. In the refugee quarters, Zixandra Cathalar lay on a narrow cot, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her mother. The human station was strange, all sharp angles and harsh lighting, so different from the flowing organic architecture of her homeworld. But it was also unexpectedly warm, filled with the quiet sounds of life continuing despite the darkness pressing in from all sides. She had been surprised by the humans' kindness. The stories told on Zurion Prime had painted them as barely civilized brutes who solved every problem with violence. But the reality was far more complex. Yes, they were warriors, that much was obvious from their scars and their constant vigilance, but they were also healers, protectors, builders of sanctuaries in the void. Perhaps that was why the Concord feared them so much. A soft chime from the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, sitting up as the portal slid open. The human female. Brooks stood in the doorway, holding a sealed container. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Zixandra caught hints of tension in her posture. "Miss Cathlar, I have something that belongs to you." Brooks opened the container, revealing the amulet that had belonged to Zixandra's mother. The artifact seemed to glow with its own inner light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I thought it had been confiscated for security screening," Zixandra said, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "It was Captain's orders were to return it to you." Brooks handed over the amulet, her movements careful and respectful. "He said it belongs with your family." Zixandra took the amulet with trembling hands, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her fingers as she touched the crystalline surface. For a moment she could almost hear her mother's voice, singing the old lullabies that spoke of stars and dreams and journeys through the infinite dark. "Please thank your captain for me," she whispered, fastening the chain around her neck. "This means more than I can express." Brooks nodded. "Just be careful with it. Beautiful things have a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention out here." After the human left, Zixandra sat in the dim light of her quarters holding the amulet against her heart. She didn't understand why the captain had chosen to trust her with something that clearly held significance beyond its sentimental value, but she understood that trust was a gift, precious and fragile in the harsh realities of interstellar space. She would prove worthy of it. 3 decks away in the station's communications center, a coded transmission raced through hyperspace toward the Outer Rim territories. The message was brief, encrypted and addressed to a ship that flew under no flag and answered to no law. "Package confirmed aboard Haven's Rest. Girl has artifact. Proceed as planned." The transmission was signed with a symbol that would have been recognized by any student of galactic criminal organizations. The mark of the Void Serpents, mercenaries and thieves who specialized in acquiring things that others believed were safely hidden. In 17 hours they would arrive at Haven's Rest, and Zixandra Cathalar's quiet sanctuary would become a battlefield. But for now she slept peacefully, the amulet warm against her skin, dreaming of her mother's voice and the songs of distant stars. In her dreams she danced among galaxies while a human voice whispered promises of protection, and the darkness that hunted her could not find her in the light of crystallized starfire. The storm was coming, but she was not alone. The attack came at 0630 ship's time, during the shift change when Haven's Rest defenses were at their most vulnerable. Captain David Harrison was in his quarters, reviewing casualty reports from the refugee convoy, when the first explosion shook the station's superstructure. Emergency klaxons screamed as he raced to the command center, his bare feet slapping against cold deck plating. The tactical display painted a grim picture. 3 unidentified vessels had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system's detection grid, their approach masked by the ionic interference of a nearby nebula. They were closing fast, and their configuration marked them as raiders. "Status report," David barked as he slid into the captain's chair. Lieutenant Commander Brooks was already at her station, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. 3 ships, military configuration but no transponder codes. "They've launched boarding pods, impact in 47 seconds. Where are they targeting?" "Refugee quarters, docking bay 7, and Brooks paused, her expression darkening. "Vault 7. David's blood turned to ice. Someone knew about the amulet. This wasn't a random raid, it was a surgical strike designed to extract a specific prize. The refugees were just convenient cover. "All hands, battle stations, seal off the affected sections and prepare to repel boarders." I opened a channel to the station's security chief. Commander Singh, I need Marines at the refugee quarters immediately. Protect those civilians at all costs. Already on it, Captain. But sir, 3 squads of boarders against my security detail. We're outnumbered 5-1. David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Then he opened them, and his voice carried the absolute authority of a man who had commanded ships in the void for 15 years. Then we'll have to be 5 times as good. Harrison out. Zixandra Kathalar woke to the sound of screaming. The gentle hum of the station's life support systems had been replaced by the harsh wail of emergency alarms, and the deck beneath her feet vibrated with the rhythmic thunder of explosions. She rolled from her cot, her natural grace allowing her to land in a defensive crouch despite her disorientation. Around her, the other refugees were in various states of panic. Veltar was attempting to maintain order, his diplomatic training warring with the primal fear that made his skin flash through rapid cycles of alarmed colors. The elderly and injured huddled together in the center of the compartment, while the younger HFY positioned themselves protectively around the vulnerable. "What's happening?" Zixandra called out, her hand instinctively moving to the amulet at her throat. "Attacking ships," Veltar replied, his voice strained. "Unknown aggressors. The humans are trying to protect us." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a heartbeat later, bathing the compartment in hellish red illumination. But in that moment of absolute darkness, Zixandra felt the amulet pulse against her skin, its crystalline structure warming in response to some unseen threat. The door to the refugee quarters exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke and debris came figures in powered armor, sleek, predatory suits that moved with inhuman grace. Their faces were hidden behind faceplates that reflected the emergency lighting like the eyes of hunting spiders. Each figure carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and the insignia on their armor bore the twisted serpent symbol of mercenaries who sold their services to the highest bidder. Zixandra Kathalar, the lead figure, spoke, its voice artificially modulated to sound like grinding metal. "You will come with us. Resist, and your fellow refugees will suffer the consequences." The amulet grew warmer against Zixandra's skin, and she felt a strange tingling sensation spread through her nervous system. Images flashed through her mind, glimpses of ancient battles, of her ancestors wielding powers that had been lost to time and war. The artifact was more than a family heirloom. It was a key, a weapon, a fragment of her people's forgotten legacy. "I will not abandon my people," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the mercenaries' weapons waver slightly. "Then they will die." The lead mercenary raised his weapon, the barrel glowing with lethal energy. But before he could fire, the compartment's rear entrance erupted in an explosion of gunfire and shouting voices. Human Marines poured through the breach, their primitive kinetic weapons chattering like angry insects. The mercenaries' energy shields flared as projectiles struck them, but the humans kept coming, their advance relentless and coordinated. These were not the civilized peacekeepers of the Concord. These were warriors born of a world that had tried to kill them since birth, and they fought with the desperate ferocity of a cornered animal. Leading the charge was the human medic she had spoken with during the rescue, Jackson Wright. But now he carried a military-grade assault rifle with the casual competence of someone who had learned to kill before he learned to heal. His green eyes blazed with protective fury as he placed himself between the mercenaries and the refugees. "Get away from them," he roared, his weapon spitting fire and death. The mercenary leader turned toward him, energy weapon charging for a killing shot. But Zixandra was already moving, her enhanced reflexes carrying her forward faster than human or alien eyes could follow. The amulet blazed with sudden light, and she felt power flow through her like liquid starfire. Her hand struck the mercenary's weapon just as it fired, deflecting the energy beam into the ceiling. The blast that should have incinerated Jackson Wright instead carved a molten gash through the deck plating above their heads. The mercenary spun toward her, raising his weapon for another shot. But Jackson was already there, his rifle butt connecting with the armored figure's helmet in a blow that would have shattered human bones. The mercenary staggered, and in that moment of vulnerability Zixandra struck again. This time the amulet's power flowed through her freely. Her hands blazed with crystalline light as she grasped the mercenary's armor, and the alien metal began to sublime under her touch. transforming directly from solid to gas without passing through liquid phase. The armored figure screamed as his protection dissolved around him, revealing a pale humanoid with cybernetic implants where his eyes should have been. Impossible, he gasped. The Cathalar bloodline was extinguished. The archive said. Zixandra's hand closed around his throat and her voice carried the authority of ancient queens when she spoke. The archives lied. The remaining mercenaries opened fire, their energy weapons painting the compartment in deadly light. But the human marines had taken cover behind overturned furniture and debris, and their return fire was devastatingly accurate. Where energy beams required charging time and careful aim, kinetic projectiles could be fired as fast as a human finger could pull a trigger. Jackson appeared at Zixandra's side, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. "We need to get these people out of here." His words were cut off as another mercenary bounded over their improvised barricade, energy blade crackling as it swept toward the young medic's neck. Zixandra moved without thinking, the amulet's power flowing through her like a river of molten stars. Her hand met the energy blade barehanded, and instead of being severed, her fingers seemed to absorb the weapon's deadly light. The mercenary stared in shock as his weapon dimmed and died. "What are you?" "I am Cathalar," Zixandra replied, her skin beginning to glow with the same crystalline radiance as her family's ancient artifact. "We are the children of stars, and you have threatened what we protect." She struck the mercenary with an open palm and his armor cracked like an eggshell. The impact sent him flying across the compartment to crash into the far wall where he lay still and smoking. Around them, the battle was turning. The human marines had superior numbers and defensive positions while the mercenaries' energy weapons were proving less effective against fast-moving targets in close quarters. But the cost was mounting. She could see wounded humans slumped behind cover, their red blood stark against the silver deck plating. "Jackson," she called out, her voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "Your people are dying to protect us. This must end." The young medic looked up from where he was treating a wounded marine, his hands slick with blood. "What do you suggest? We can't exactly negotiate with these bastards." Zixandra felt the amulet pulse against her skin, and suddenly she understood. The artifact wasn't just a weapon or a key, it was a beacon, calling to others of her bloodline scattered across the galaxy. And right now it was also broadcasting her location to every sensor array within 100 light-years. "They didn't come for the refugees," she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They came for me. For this." She touched the amulet, feeling its warm weight against her palm. "Then we'll make sure they don't get it," Jackson replied grimly, chambering a fresh round into his rifle. "No." Zixandra's voice was soft but absolute. "I won't let more humans die for my family's legacy. I'm going with them." "Like hell you are." The new voice belonged to Captain Harrison himself, who had appeared in the breach with a squad of heavy marines. His uniform was scorched and torn, and he carried a plasma rifle that looked like it had been liberated from one of the attacking ships. His gray eyes swept across the battlefield, taking in the wounded, the dead, and the young alien woman who stood glowing like a star among the ruins. "Captain," Zixandra began, "your people have done enough. This is my burden." "Ma'am," Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute command. "With respect, you're under the protection of the colonial administration. These mercenary scum want you. They can damn well go through us to get you." He raised his weapon and opened fire on the remaining mercenaries, the plasma bolts burning through their energy shields like paper. "All Marines, advance. Show these raiders what happens when they threaten refugees under human protection." The humans surged forward with a ferocity that left Zixandra breathless. These were not the civilized warriors of the Concord who fought with honor and restraint. These were death-world predators unleashed in the defense of innocent life, and they gave no quarter to those who threatened their charges. But even as the mercenaries fell back before the human assault, Zixandra could feel something wrong in the cosmic harmonies around them. The amulet was growing hotter against her skin, its crystalline structure resonating with frequencies that made her bones ache. "Captain," she called out, her voice cutting through the battle. "Something's wrong. The artifact, it's responding to something." Harrison glanced back at her, and in that moment of distraction a mercenary's energy bolt caught him in the shoulder. The plasma burned through his uniform and into flesh, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the deck. Zix Indra felt something snap inside her chest, not pain but fury so pure it burned like a white-hot star. The human captain had risked his life to protect her people, had chosen compassion over protocol when he could have confiscated her family's treasure, and now he lay bleeding because of her burden. The amulet blazed with sudden radiance, and Zix Indra felt power flow through her unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was not the gentle warmth of familial magic. This was the raw force of stellar creation, the violent beauty of supernovas compressed into a single moment of absolute will. "Enough," she whispered, and her voice carried the authority of dying stars. Every mercenary in the compartment froze as invisible force seized them. Their armor began to crack under pressures that existed only in the hearts of gas giants. Their weapons sparked and died as alien energies interfered with their targeting systems. "You came seeking treasure," Zix Indra said, rising into the air as crystalline light spilled from her skin like liquid starfire. "But you found only death." She closed her hands into fists, and every mercenary in the compartment screamed as their armor imploded around them. The lucky ones died instantly. The others had time to regret their choices before the cosmic forces crushing them granted them the mercy of oblivion. When it was over, Zix Indra collapsed to the deck, the amulet dark and cold against her skin. Jackson Wright was there instantly, his hands gentle as he checked her vitals with the efficiency of a trained medic. "I'm all right," she gasped, though her skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. "Captain Harrison, is he?" "Plasma burns, but he'll live," Jackson replied, though his voice carried a note of awe as he looked at the twisted remains of the mercenary's armor. "What the hell was that? What are you?" Zix Indra struggled to sit up, accepting his help despite her people's natural independence. "I'm beginning to think I don't know, but I'm starting to understand why they want this so badly." She touched the amulet, feeling its dormant power stirring like a sleeping dragon. Around them, the human marines were securing the compartment and tending to their wounded. But Zix Indra could feel the wrongness growing stronger in the cosmic harmonies that surrounded them. The amulet had awakened something when she used its power, something vast and ancient and utterly hostile to all organic life. "Jackson," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sounds of post-battle cleanup. "I think we're in more trouble than we know." Before he could ask what she meant, the station's emergency broadcast system crackled to life with Captain Harrison's voice, though it was strained with pain and exhaustion. "All hands, this is the captain. We've repelled the boarding parties, but long-range sensors are picking up massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. Something big is coming our way. All civilians are to report to emergency shelters immediately." "This is not a drill." Zix Indra felt the amulet pulse against her skin, and in that moment of contact she saw visions that chilled her to the bone. Ships like mobile cities, their hulls black as the void between stars. Weapons that could crack planets like eggs, and at the center of it all, an intelligence so alien and malevolent that her mind recoiled from even the briefest contact. "The Devourers," she whispered, the ancient name falling from her lips like a curse. "The amulet," it called to them. "They know where we are." Jackson stared at her, and she could see the questions burning in his green eyes. But there would be time for explanations later. If any of them survived what was coming, the real war was about to begin. The first Devourer ship dropped out of hyperspace like a wound in reality itself. Captain David Harrison watched from the command center as long-range sensors painted the impossible vessel on his tactical display, a construct of living metal and crystallized darkness that defied every law of physics he understood. It was 3 kilometers long and shaped like a massive predatory insect, its hull rippling with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Mother of God," Lieutenant Commander Brooks whispered, her face pale in the glow of the tactical display. "What is that thing?" "Trouble," Harrison replied grimly, his wounded shoulder aching as he gripped the command chair. "The kind of trouble that makes our little mercenary problem look like a training exercise." 2 more ships materialized at the edge of the system, identical nightmares that began moving toward Haven's Rest with the inexorable patience of incoming asteroids. Their approach was unhurried but absolute, as if the outcome of any confrontation was already a foregone conclusion. "Sir," the communications officer called out, We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. It's not using any known communication protocol. Put it through. The command center filled with a sound like screaming metal and dying stars. When the noise resolved into something resembling language, the voice that emerged carried harmonics that made every human in the room feel sick to their cores. Children of the burning world, you possess that which belongs to the eternal hunger. Surrender the Cathalar bloodline and the stellar heart, and your deaths will be swift. Harrison exchanged glances with Brooks. Stellar heart? The amulet, Brooks said quietly. It has to be. They're talking about the girl and her artifact. You have 60 seconds to comply. Resistance will result in the consumption of all organic matter in this system. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in tense silence. Harrison stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through options that all seemed to end in the same place: total annihilation. Haven's Rest was a civilian station with minimal defenses. Against 3 ships that looked like they could crack moons, their weapons would be less than useless. Captain, Brooks said quietly, we could evacuate the refugees to the outer system. Buy them time to reach. There is no reach, Harrison interrupted. Those ships are faster than anything we have. If they want the girl and the artifact, running won't solve the problem. He opened a station-wide communication channel. All hands. This is the captain. We are facing an enemy that outguns us, outnumbers us, and apparently wants to kill every living thing in this system. Our options are surrender or fight. He paused, looking around at the faces of his crew. I don't know about you, but I didn't crawl out of Earth's gravity well just to roll over for alien pirates. A ragged cheer went up from the command center, and Harrison felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt since the Titan Rebellion. The fierce joy of humans facing impossible odds and choosing defiance anyway. Brooks, get me everything we have on Devourer ships. Science fiction databases, historical records, conspiracy theories. I don't care if it came from a drunk spacer's bar story. If someone somewhere has fought these things before, I want to know how. Sir, our databases don't show any records of this species. Whatever they are, first contact protocols don't cover. Then we'll write new protocols, Harrison said grimly, starting with shoot the bastards until they stop moving. 3 decks below, in the medical bay that had been converted into a refugee treatment center, Zixandra Cathalar sat on an examination table while Dr. Jackson Wright ran scans of her vital signs. The amulet lay on a nearby counter, its crystalline surface dark but somehow still radiating a sense of vast, sleeping power. Your neural activity is off the charts, Jackson said, studying the readouts with professional fascination. Whatever happened during the boarding action, it's triggered changes in your brain chemistry that shouldn't be possible. The artifact awakens something in my bloodline, Indra replied, her voice distant. Powers that were lost when the Devourers last came to our worlds eons ago. My ancestors sealed them away rather than risk drawing attention from the eternal hunger. The what now? Before she could answer, the medical bay's lights flickered and both of them felt a strange sensation as if the station itself had shuddered in fear. Jackson's medical scanners went haywire, their displays filling with error messages and impossible readings. They're here, Zixandra whispered, her skin paling to almost transparent silver. The Devourers. They've found us. Jackson looked up from his instruments, his green eyes reflecting the same determination she had seen during the boarding action. Then we fight. You don't understand. These aren't raiders or mercenaries. The Devourers are older than your species, older than mine. They consume entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty worlds and silent stars. My people barely survived our last encounter with them, and that was when we still remembered how to wield the ancient powers. Maybe your people barely survived, Jackson said, moving to a storage locker and pulling out a military-grade rifle. But they've never faced humans before. Despite everything, Zixandra found herself smiling. You truly are Deathworld-born, aren't you? Faced with cosmic horrors beyond comprehension, and your first instinct is to pick up a weapon. Deathworld-born and Deathworld-raised, Jackson confirmed, checking his weapon's charge level. My great-grandfather fought in the Resource Wars. My father died at the Battle of Europa, and I've seen what happens when good people do nothing in the face of evil. He looked at her directly, his expression serious. Question is, what are you going to do? Zixandra looked at the amulet, feeling its dormant power calling to her like a song just beyond the edge of hearing. Using it had nearly killed her, but it had also shown her glimpses of what her people had once been capable of. If the Devourers truly were here, if they truly intended to consume everything in this system, I'm going to try something that will probably kill me, she said quietly. But first, I need to understand what we're really facing. She reached for the amulet, and the moment her fingers touched its crystalline surface, the universe exploded into patterns of light and meaning that human language had no words to describe. Memories not her own flooded through her consciousness. The last stand of the Cathalar supremacy against an enemy that devoured stars themselves. She saw her ancestors wielding powers that could reshape matter at the quantum level, watched fleets of crystalline ships fight battles across the dimensional barriers that separated parallel universes, and she saw the final desperate gambit that had driven the Devourers back. A sacrifice so terrible that her people had chosen to forget their own heritage rather than remember what they had been forced to become. The stellar hearts were not weapons or treasure. They were keys, locks placed on cosmic forces too dangerous for any single species to wield. But they were also the only things that could stop the eternal hunger when it woke from its long slumber between the galaxies. When the vision faded, Zixandra found herself on the medical bay floor, Jackson's hands gentle but firm as he helped her sit up. Her skin was glowing with soft crystalline light, and she could feel power flowing through her nervous system like liquid starfire. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "The truth," she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself shimmer. "Out, my people, about the Devourers, about why this artifact is worth killing for." She looked at him directly, and he saw ancient sadness in her large eyes. "Jackson, if I do what needs to be done, there might not be anything left of me afterward. Will you help me anyway?" "Always," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." She smiled, and for a moment, she looked like any young woman facing an uncertain future, rather than the inheritor of cosmic powers beyond imagination. "Then help me get to the command center. It's time to show the Devourers that they're not the only ones who remember how to be monsters." The attack began with a sound like reality tearing apart at the seams. Heaven's Rest shuddered as Devourer weapons reached across the void. Not energy beams or kinetic projectiles, but something far worse. Where they touched the station's hull, metal began to age and corrode at an accelerated rate. Centuries of entropy compressed into seconds. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as sections of the outer ring were consumed by temporal distortions that turned steel into rust and air into poison. In the command center, Harrison watched his station die one section at a time. "Return fire. All weapons. Everything we have." Heaven's Rest defensive batteries opened up with streams of plasma and kinetic projectiles, their fire converging on the lead Devourer ship. The alien vessel's hull rippled as human weapons struck it. But instead of damage, the impact seemed to feed something hungry and alive within the ship's structure. The bioluminescent patterns grew brighter, and the return volley came twice as strong. "Sir, our weapons are making it stronger," Brooks reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Every hit is increasing its energy output. Then we'll have to try a different approach," Harrison said grimly. "All ships in the area. This is Heaven's Rest. We are under attack by hostile alien vessels. Any ship that can hear this transmission, we need immediate assistance." The response came from an unexpected source. A voice Harrison recognized as belonging to Captain Veltar, the HFY diplomatic attaché among the refugees. "Captain Harrison, this is Veltar aboard the transport Singing Void. My ship is damaged, but still spaceworthy. We stand ready to assist. Veltar, with respect, your transport has no weapons and minimal shielding. This isn't your fight. With respect, Captain, these refugees are under your protection, which makes them under human protection. And where I come from, that means something." The alien's voice carried a fierce pride that would have done credit to any human warrior. "We may not be Deathworld born, but we have learned from your example. Singing Void is moving to intercept." Harrison watched in amazement as the damaged Zephyr transport maneuvered between Heaven's Rest and the attacking ships. its crystalline hull glowing with what had to be its entire power reserve. The small ship was dwarfed by the Devourer vessels, but it bought precious seconds for the station's evacuation procedures. Those seconds lasted exactly until the Devourers noticed the transport's interference. The lead ship's weapons systems focused on Singing Void, and Harrison watched in horror as temporal distortion waves reached across space to age the HFY vessel into scrap. But instead of disintegrating, the transport's hull began to glow brighter, its crystalline structure converting the entropy weapon's energy into something else entirely. "Impossible," Brooks whispered. "How are they?" The answer came as Singing Void exploded, not in destruction, but in a nova of pure crystalline light that washed across the Devourer ships like a tide of liquid starfire. For a moment the alien vessel's bioluminescent patterns flickered and dimmed, as if something essential had been drained from their systems. Then the light faded, and Singing Void was gone, its crew transformed into expanding clouds of glowing particles that danced among the stars like the ghosts of heroes. "Veltar," Harrison said quietly, his voice thick with grief and respect. The command center doors burst open, and Zixandra Kektelar entered, supported by Dr. Wright but walking under her own power. Her skin was translucent with inner light, and the amulet at her throat blazed like a captive star. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself sing. "Captain, I know how to stop them, but I need you to trust me completely." Harrison looked at her, this young alien woman, who had already lost everything and was now offering to lose more for the sake of strangers. In her glowing eyes he saw the same fierce determination that had carried humanity from the cradles of Earth to the edge of the galaxy. "What do you need?" "Get everyone off the station. Every human, every refugee, everyone. What I'm about to do will change the fundamental nature of local space-time. Anyone caught in the effect radius will be altered." "Altered how?" Zixandra's smile was sad and beautiful and terrible. "I don't know, the records from the last time my people did this were deliberately destroyed. But Captain Veltar and his crew just showed me that there are worse things than death. There's also surrender." Harrison nodded grimly. "Brooks, initiate full evacuation. All personnel to the emergency transports. Move like our lives depend on it." "Because they do," Zixandra added quietly, her attention turning to the tactical display where the Devourer ships were beginning their final approach. "They're preparing to board. Once they're on the station, they'll be able to track the amulet's resonance signature anywhere in the galaxy. This ends here, one way or another." As the evacuation began, Jackson Wright remained at Zixandra's side despite her attempts to convince him to leave. "I'm a medic," he said simply. "My job is to preserve life. If what you're about to do kills you, maybe I can bring you back." "Jackson, the energies I'm going to channel could unravel your molecular structure on a quantum level. Then I guess we'll find out if humans are as tough as everyone thinks we are." He checked his medical kit one final time. "Besides, someone needs to be here to witness what happens. If this is humanity's first real look at cosmic forces beyond our understanding, we should probably take notes." "Despite everything," Zixandra laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in a solar wind, "you truly are impossible." "Very well, let's stay behind the blast shields. And if I tell you to run, I'll run," Jackson promised. But not before. Around them, Haven's Rest groaned under the assault of entropy weapons, its hull aging decades with every passing minute. But the evacuation was proceeding smoothly, testament to the efficiency of human crisis response protocols. Within 20 minutes the station would be empty except for Zixandra, Jackson, and whatever cosmic forces were about to be unleashed. Zixandra closed her eyes and reached for the amulet, feeling its vast power stirring in response to her touch. Somewhere in the depths of space, she could sense the Devourer ships closing in, their hunger a palpable force that made the void itself recoil. They were ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond comprehension, and utterly without mercy. But they had never faced the children of stars backed into a corner by Death World warriors who refused to yield. It was time to remind the universe that sometimes the prey had claws. The final evacuation transport had barely cleared Haven's Rest docking bay when the Devourer ships completed their approach. Up close, they were even more nightmarish than the long-range sensors had suggested. living vessels that pulsed with malevolent intelligence, their hulls rippling with organic textures that suggested they had once been something else entirely. Captain Harrison watched from the bridge of the evacuation fleet's command vessel as boarding pods launched from the alien ships like metallic spores. Each pod was the size of a fighter craft, but they moved with the fluid grace of sea creatures, their surfaces covered in writhing appendages that would allow them to burrow through hull plating like parasites. "Sir," Brooks reported from her station, "we're receiving a transmission from the station. It's Dr. Wright." Harrison activated the communication link, and Jackson's voice filled the bridge. The young medic sounded calm despite the circumstances, though there was an undercurrent of awe in his words. "Captain Zixandra is beginning the activation sequence. I'm going to try to document what happens. But sir, this isn't like anything in our databases. The energy readings are off every scale we have." "Understood, Doctor. What's your status?" "Stable, for now. Zixandra has erected some kind of protective barrier around our position. The air is glowing and I can feel static electricity making my hair stand up. But sir, the artifact, it's beautiful and terrifying. I think I'm beginning to understand why her people chose to forget this power." On the main view screen, Harrison could see Haven's Rest's command center through the station's external cameras. Zixandra Cathalar stood at the center of the room, her hands pressed against the stellar heart as crystalline light poured from her skin in waves. The amulet itself had become too bright to look at directly, its radiance turning the air around it into prisms of impossible color. The first boarding pod struck the station's hull with a sound like thunder. Then another, and another. Soon, dozens of Devourer infiltrators would be swarming through Haven's Rest's corridors, their only goal to reach the command center and claim the artifact that their species had hunted across the void for eons. "How long does she need?" Harrison asked. "Unknown, sir. She says she's trying to access genetic memories locked in her DNA. The process could take minutes or hours." Jackson's voice was interrupted by a distant explosion. "Sir, they're through the outer hull. I can hear them moving through the ventilation systems." Harrison clenched his fists, feeling helpless as he watched the young woman who had already lost everything prepare to sacrifice herself for strangers. "Doctor, if there's anything we can do—" "Actually, sir, there might be." Jackson's voice carried a note of sudden hope. "Zixandra says the activation process is being slowed by interference from the Devourer ships. Their presence in local space is creating quantum distortions that are fighting against the artifact's resonance patterns." "What does that mean?" "It means that if we could distract them, draw their attention away from the station." Jackson's meaning was clear. The evacuation fleet was small and lightly armed, but they might be able to buy time by forcing the Devourer ships to split their attention. Harrison looked around the bridge at the faces of his crew. They were civilian technicians and volunteer militia, not professional soldiers. But they were also human, and when humanity was backed into a corner, they had a tendency to do the impossible. "All ships, this is Harrison. We're going in. Target the enemy vessel's weapon systems and try draw their fire away from the station. This is a suicide run, people. But if we can give that girl the time she needs—" The evacuation fleet turned as one, their improvised weapons charging as they accelerated toward the massive Devourer ships. They looked like gnats attacking dragons. But they came on anyway, their human crews shouting defiance at an uncaring universe. The Devourers noticed. Energy weapons that could age matter into dust began tracking the approaching ships, and Harrison felt time slow to a crawl as he watched death reach across the void toward them. Then the universe exploded into light. The moment Zixandra's genetic locks finally released, every sapient being within 1,000 light-years felt reality shift around them. The stellar heart blazed with the fury of a newborn star as ancient pathways in her DNA activated, flooding her nervous system with power that had been dormant since the fall of the Cathalar supremacy. But this was not the gentle awakening she had experienced during the boarding action. This was the full activation of bloodline abilities that had once allowed her ancestors to reshape matter at the quantum level, to step between dimensions as easily as walking through a doorway, to speak commands that the universe itself was compelled to obey. The pain was indescribable. Jackson Wright watched from behind his blast shield as Zixandra's physical form began to blur at the edges, her cellular structure shifting between states of matter that had no names in any language. The amulet at her throat had become a miniature sun, its radiance burning after images into his retinas even through his protective equipment. "Zixandra," he called out, but his voice was lost in the cosmic harmonics that filled the command center. She heard him anyway. When she turned toward him, her eyes had become windows into the deep structure of space-time itself, galaxies spinning in the depths of her pupils. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of stellar formation and the finality of entropy. "Jackson, thank you for believing in me. What comes next? Remember that some boundaries exist for a reason." She raised her hands and the stellar heart rose from her throat to float in the air before her, its crystalline structure unfolding like a flower made of frozen starlight. As it opened, Jackson could see depths within the artifact that seemed to extend into dimensions that human geometry couldn't map. Throughout Haven's Rest, the Devourer infiltrators suddenly stopped their advance. Their biomechanical forms shuddered as impossible energies washed over them, and for the first time in eons they felt something they had forgotten existed: fear. In the void around the station, the three Devourer ships began to retreat, their ancient intelligence recognizing the signature of forces that had once driven them from entire galactic clusters. But they were too late. The stellar heart had already begun its work, and the fundamental laws of local reality were rewriting themselves to accommodate its will. "I call upon the names of those who came before," Zixandra said, her voice echoing across dimensions. "I invoke the sacrifice of Cathalornis the Starbreaker, who gave her life to seal the first Void Gate. I claim the inheritance of Dirithik the World Shaper, who taught matter to remember its dreams. I speak with the authority of Velkashter the Dawnbringer, who lit the first fire in the cosmic dark." With each name, the artifact blazed brighter, and Jackson could feel reality becoming increasingly unstable around them. The walls of the command center began to phase in and out of existence, showing glimpses of other timelines, other possibilities, other universes where different choices had been made. "By blood and starlight, by sacrifice and will, I claim the right of the Cathalar bloodline to speak for the cosmos itself." Zepsandra's form was now more energy than matter, her consciousness expanding to encompass local space-time in a sphere of influence that grew larger with each passing second. "Devourers of the eternal hunger, you are no longer welcome in this reality. I banish you to the spaces between dimensions, where your appetite can feast only on entropy and void." The effect was immediate and absolute. The Devourer ship screamed, a sound that propagated through hyperspace rather than normal space, reaching across galactic distances to warn their kind that the ancient enemy had awakened once more. Their hulls began to phase out of normal reality, pulled into the dimensional gaps where only the most abstract forms of existence could survive. But banishing three massive ships and their crews required a price that even cosmic power could not avoid. Jackson watched in horror as Zixandra's physical form began to unravel, her component atoms scattering into patterns of light that painted impossible geometries across the command center walls. "No," he shouted, abandoning his protective position to rush toward her. "There has to be another way." "Jackson, stay back," her voice thundered, but there was desperation beneath the cosmic authority. "I can't control it. The power is too much. I'm losing myself." Jackson didn't hesitate. He plunged through the barrier of crystalline energy that surrounded her, feeling his own molecular structure begin to vibrate as alien forces tried to rewrite his genetic code. The pain was beyond description, but he pushed through it, driven by something stronger than self-preservation. His hands found hers in the maelstrom of cosmic forces, and suddenly the chaotic energies began to stabilize. Human determination, born of a species that had refused to accept limitations since the first proto-human looked at the sky and decided to climb toward it, provided an anchor point for power that had been spinning out of control. "Impossible," Zixandra whispered, her voice returning to normal human ranges as Jackson's presence helped her regain cohesion. "How are you?" "Deathworld born," Jackson said simply, his hands steady despite the fact that they were glowing with absorbed energy. "We're too stubborn to let a little thing like physics stop us." Together, they guided the stellar heart's power into a controlled release that sent the last of the Devourer ships screaming into dimensional exile. As the cosmic forces finally ebbed, Zixandra collapsed into Jackson's arms, her skin returning to normal colors as the artifacts settled back against her throat. Around them, Haven's Rest groaned as its structure readjusted to normal space-time. But the station was intact, and more importantly, the Devourers were gone, vanished to realms where their hunger could no longer threaten organic life. "Is it over?" Jackson asked quietly, his voice hoarse from shouting over cosmic harmonics. Zixandra looked up at him, and her eyes were her own again, large, expressive, and filled with emotions too complex for any language to capture. "The immediate threat, yes. But Jackson, what I've done, it will draw attention from across the galaxy. Other powers, other ancient enemies who thought the Cathalar bloodline was extinct. Then we'll face them too," he said simply. "Humans are good at making enemies. We're even better at surviving them." She smiled, and for the first time since her homeworld had burned, it reached her eyes. "You know, for a species that the Concord considers barely civilized, you have a remarkable talent for saying exactly the right thing." "It's a gift," Jackson said, helping her to her feet as the evacuation fleet's ships began returning to dock with the station. "Besides, someone has to keep an eye on you. Cosmic powers or not, you still need a medic." As Haven's Rest came back to life around them, neither of them noticed the way the stellar heart pulsed gently against Zixandra's skin, or the fact that Jackson's hands still carried traces of crystalline light from their contact with forces beyond mortal comprehension. Some changes took time to manifest, but across the galaxy, ancient powers were stirring, drawn by the signature of awakened Cathalar abilities. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. And somewhere in the cosmic dark, the scattered remnants of the Devourer fleet carried news that would reshape the balance of power in 12 sectors. The Death World humans had found allies who remembered how to fight gods. The universe would never be the same. The diplomatic reception aboard the orbital platform, New Harmony, was supposed to be a celebration of the new trade agreements between the colonial administration and the reformed HFY Republic. Captain David Harrison stood near the observation windows, watching ships from a dozen different species dock with the massive station that had been built from the salvaged remains of 3 Devourer vessels. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's first major diplomatic victory had been built on the bones of cosmic nightmares, transformed from instruments of consumption into symbols of cooperation. It was, he reflected, a very human approach to problem-solving. "Captain Harrison?" The voice belonged to Ambassador Zixandra Cathalar, though she looked very different from the refugee who had arrived at Haven's Rest 6 months earlier. She wore the formal robes of a Cathalar keeper, a title that hadn't been used in over 1,000 years, but her bearing was unmistakably that of someone who had faced the fire between stars and emerged stronger. "Ambassador," Harrison replied, noting the subtle way her skin shimmered with barely contained energy. "I have to admit, when I agreed to return your family's heirloom, I didn't expect it to lead to humanity's first invitation to join the Galactic Concord." Zixandra smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to the stellar heart at her throat. "The Council of Species has always respected strength, Captain. When word spread that humans had stood with the Catellar Keeper against the eternal hunger, their perspective on your species underwent what you might call a fundamental revision. And Dr. Wright? How is he adjusting to his new situation?" They both looked across the reception hall to where Jackson Wright was deep in conversation with a group of Concord xenobiologists. He looked entirely human, but those with the ability to see beyond the normal spectrum could detect the crystalline patterns that now flowed through his nervous system, a permanent gift from his contact with cosmic forces during the battle at Haven's Rest. "He calls it enhanced intuition," Zixandra said with obvious affection. "But his medical abilities have become almost supernatural. He can diagnose conditions that our most advanced scanners miss, and his understanding of alien biology has made him one of the most sought-after physicians in 3 sectors. And the two of you?" Zixandra's skin shifted to warmer hues, betraying emotions that her diplomatic training couldn't quite suppress. "We're figuring it out. Cross-species relationships are complicated under the best of circumstances. When one party can manipulate matter at the quantum level and the other seems to be developing abilities that shouldn't be possible for unenhanced humans, you'll figure it out," Harrison said with quiet confidence. "You've both got experience with impossible situations." As if summoned by their conversation, Jackson appeared at Zixandra's side, his green eyes bright with the kind of contentment that came from finding one's purpose in life. "Captain, have you heard the latest reports from the Outer Rim? 3 more Devourer cells have been located and neutralized. Turns out the universe has quite a few species that remember the old wars once they realized someone was still willing to fight them. And humanity's role in all this." Jackson and Zixandra exchanged glances, and Harrison caught the subtle communication that passed between them, part spoken language, part harmonic resonance, part something else entirely that spoke to the bond they had forged in the fires of cosmic conflict. "We're teachers," Zixandra said finally. "The Concord species have forgotten how to fight wars against enemies that can't be reasoned with or deterred. They've grown civilized, which is admirable, but civilization is a luxury that requires protection. And humans," Jackson added with a grin that would have been at home on any Earth battlefield, "are very good at protection." As the reception continued around them, Harrison found himself thinking about the strange turns that life could take. 6 months ago, he had been commanding a backwater station, doing his best to maintain humanity's precarious foothold in hostile space. Now he was looking at preliminary reports for the Joint Defense Initiative, a military alliance between humanity and 6 Concord species designed to protect civilization from threats that lurked in the spaces between galaxies. Humanity had finally found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or refugees, but as guardians, the species that others called when the darkness pressed too close and diplomacy wasn't enough. It was, Harrison reflected, exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans excelled at. "Captain?" Zixandra's voice drew him from his thoughts. "There's something else you should know. The stellar heart isn't the only Cathalar artifact that survived the fall of our empire. There are others scattered across the galaxy, and with the awakening of my bloodline abilities, they're beginning to resonate. Meaning that the Devourers weren't the only ancient evil that my ancestors locked away," she said quietly. "And some of those locks are starting to weaken." Jackson's expression grew serious. "But we've learned a few things about fighting cosmic horrors, and we've got allies now who remember what's at stake." Harrison nodded, feeling the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, but this time it was tempered by something that humanity had rarely enjoyed in its climb to the stars: the knowledge that they weren't facing the darkness alone. "Then I suppose we'd better get ready," he said simply. "The universe isn't going to protect itself." As the 3 of them stood together, looking out at the ships and stars and infinite possibilities that stretched before them, none of them noticed the way the stellar heart pulsed gently against Zixandra's throat, its crystalline structure resonating with frequencies that carried across space and time. Somewhere in the cosmic dark, ancient powers stirred in response to that call. But somewhere else, human ships loaded with impossible weapons and crewed by warriors born of a death world were already moving to meet them. The galaxy had its guardians at last, and the guardians were ready for war.